One of the most persistent debates in fitness nutrition is the role of carbohydrates in building muscle. On one side, conventional sports nutrition has long emphasized carbohydrates as essential for training performance, glycogen replenishment, and recovery. On the other, the rise of low-carbohydrate and ketogenic diets has produced a vocal community of athletes and lifters who report building muscle effectively with minimal carbohydrate intake. A new meta-analysis published in the journal Sports Medicine has now examined the existing research to determine whether carbohydrate intake actually makes a meaningful difference in muscle growth, and the findings have practical implications for anyone trying to optimize their training nutrition. What the research examined. A meta-analysis takes existing studies that meet specific quality criteria and analyzes their combined data to draw conclusions with greater statistical power than any single study could provide on its own. For this analysis, researchers identified 11 randomized controlled trials, the gold standard of experimental design, that investigated the relationship between carbohydrate intake and muscle growth. The average study duration was approximately 8.5 weeks, with roughly 20 participants per trial. Crucially, the researchers controlled for protein intake across comparisons. This was a methodologically important decision because protein is the established primary driver of muscle protein synthesis, and failing to control for it would confound the results. By looking at studies where protein intake was comparable between high carbohydrate and low carbohydrate conditions, the researchers were able to isolate carbohydrate-specific contribution. The headline result is clear. When protein intake and total calorie intake are matched, there is no significant difference in muscle growth between high carbohydrate and low carbohydrate dietary approaches. This finding aligns with previous research comparing ketogenic diets to conventional higher carbohydrate diets in resistance-trained individuals. Those studies similarly found that when protein intake was sufficiently high, athletes on ketogenic diets gained muscle at rates comparable to those eating more typical macronutrient distributions. The consistency of this result across multiple study designs strengthens the conclusion considerably. What this means at a mechanistic level is that carbohydrates do not appear to be independently required for muscle protein synthesis to occur. The building of new muscle tissue is driven primarily by adequate protein intake, providing the amino acids necessary for synthesis, resistance training providing the stimulus that triggers that synthesis, and a caloric environment that supports growth rather than catabolism. Where carbohydrates still matter. The finding that carbohydrates do not independently drive muscle growth does not mean carbohydrates are irrelevant to training and body composition. Their role is indirect but still meaningful for many athletes and training contexts. Carbohydrates are the body's preferred fuel source for high-intensity exercise. Glycogen, the stored form of glucose in muscle tissue, is the primary energy substrate during resistance training and interval-based cardio. When glycogen stores are depleted, training performance can decline. The ability to maintain intensity, volume, and power output in later sets and sessions is reduced. For someone training at moderate intensity a few times per week, low glycogen may not be a limiting factor. For competitive athletes, those training at high volume or frequency, or anyone doing multiple sessions per day, carbohydrate availability can directly affect training quality and therefore the adaptive stimulus that drives muscle growth over time. Carbohydrates also support recovery through their effect on insulin, which is a powerful anabolic hormone. Insulin does not directly stimulate muscle protein synthesis the way leucine and other essential amino acids do, but it is strongly anti-catabolic, meaning it suppresses muscle protein breakdown. The post-training insulin response driven by carbohydrate consumption helps preserve the muscle tissue that training has stimulated to grow. For most people getting adequate total protein, this effect is less critical than it was once believed, but it remains part of the recovery picture. Glycogen replenishment between training sessions is also relevant for people training on back-to-back days or multiple times per week. Adequate carbohydrate intake speeds the restoration of muscle glycogen stores, ensuring that the next session begins with sufficient fuel. Athletes who chronically underconsume carbohydrates relative to their training demands can accumulate fatigue, experience reduced performance across a training block, and paradoxically end up with less total training quality than the dietary restriction was intended to offset. Limitations of the current evidence. The meta-analysis itself acknowledges several limitations that temper how confidently its conclusions can be applied. Study duration is a significant concern. An average of 8.5 weeks is a relatively short window for assessing muscle building, which is a slow and cumulative process. It is possible that differences between high carbohydrate and low carbohydrate approaches might emerge or diverge over longer periods, particularly for advanced trainees who are already closer to their genetic ceiling for muscle growth and for whom marginal nutritional differences matter more. The measurement of muscle growth also varied across studies. Many used fat-free mass as their primary outcome rather than direct measures of muscle tissue. Fat-free mass includes water, bone, connective tissue, and organ mass in addition to skeletal muscle, so changes in fat-free mass do not necessarily reflect changes in actual muscle tissue with the precision that more sophisticated measurement tools would provide. Dietary recall, the method used to track what participants ate in many of the included studies, is known to be imprecise. People genuinely and consistently underestimate snacks, condiments, and incidental eating, which means the carbohydrate and calorie intakes reported may not accurately reflect what was actually consumed. This introduces uncertainty into the macronutrient comparisons the studies were designed to make. The practical takeaway: for most people training to build muscle, the research supports a liberating conclusion. If protein intake is adequate and total calories support growth, the specific proportion of calories coming from carbohydrates versus fats is unlikely to determine whether muscle is built. This means dietary flexibility is real and evidence-supported. Someone who thrives on a higher carbohydrate approach, who performs better in training, recovers more easily, and finds the eating pattern sustainable, should follow that approach. Someone who finds a lower carbohydrate pattern more satisfying, more practical for their lifestyle, and equally sustainable can do the same without sacrificing muscle-building results. The variables that do appear to matter consistently across the research are total protein intake, which should be sufficient to drive muscle protein synthesis throughout the day, total calorie intake, which needs to support the energy demands of training and recovery without severe restriction, training quality and progressive overload, which provide the stimulus muscle needs to grow, and sleep and recovery, without which the physiological processes of muscle growth cannot fully occur. Obsessing over carbohydrate grams in isolation, at the expense of attention to these more foundational variables, is unlikely to produce meaningful returns. The best dietary approach for building muscle is the one that supports adequate protein, adequate total energy, and consistent training within a pattern the individual can actually maintain over the months and years that meaningful muscle development requires.